Ah! As if she was trying to escape the breakneck fall in her dream, Koko's eyes snapped open, the unpleasant, stuffy smell of heat, food, exhaust, and ammonia washed over her. The torii gate and the grove that should have been in front of her had disappeared, and a concrete wall arched over her head. An underpass tunnel. Morio was nowhere to be found, either. Panicking, she turned around and found him standing a distance away from her. They had, apparently come here with heart during her dream about flying with Morio. Kokwon crept out from the sidecar and walked toward her friend, Morio. Where are we? Though her vision was still blurred from sleep, Kokwon saw a legion of skyscrapers lining stagnant waterways and a giant, gaudy billboard. The formidable sight overwhelmed her, apparently feeling the same. Morio simply stood there, too limp and wide-eyed. The pink light of day shone through the cracks between the buildings, and illuminated the Asahi beer billboard. It must have been roughly 5 in the morning. Morio managed to pull himself together and rasp, "This is Dotonbori, in Osaka." He pointed at the wall of a building, where the LED of a giant Glico billboard shone down on Kokwon. The two pulled their motorcycle from the tunnel. Its gas tank, almost full the night before, was now empty, and pushing its heavy chassis was a struggle even for the two of them together. "That I mean, we were just waiting for the Momotaris at Takamatsu, dreaming about flying on a motorcycle," Morio commented quietly once. They had pushed Hart onto a sidewalk. "Huh? You had the same dream?" "Same dream?" Kokwon had assumed that, as the dream Morio had said, the real Morio would know nothing about the dream at all, much less remember it. But he had been the one to bring it up. Suddenly elated, Kokwon peered into Morio's face. "All right. It's just like magic." Morio had realized the importance of studying in middle school, and he had always made fun of Kokwon's dreamy comments that flew in the face of logic, but this time, Morio had mentioned the shared dream. "Told you so," thought Kokwon. Sometimes, real life could be surreal, too. Kokwon flung her arms into the air in an outburst of delight. "Stop that," Morio said. "You're in high school." But those words wouldn't reach her now. Excited that her dream had somehow linked her and Morio, Kokwon couldn't have cared less about appearances, and she sprinted along the stream to begin the adventure in real life. "Are you a grade schooler?" Morio shook his head at the emotionally driven Kokwon and began searching for clues as to what had happened. The empty gas tank could mean somebody rode the bike while we were asleep. He didn't remember what the odometer had said earlier, but the motorcycle's computer should have some sort of record. Though it was an old model, Morio knew Momotaru had installed a sat-nav on it. He activated the navigation feature and checked for any records. Ordinarily, the startup menu should have appeared. But instead it read autopilot, active. Huh? Autopilot? Skeptical, Morio changed the screen to the map, which displayed a route from Takamatsu to Osaka, and after another tap, the screen read "Please, refuel." Did this old motorcycle drive them all the way here of its own accord? Morio inspected the motorcycle more closely and was surprised to find that the complex motor underneath was directly connected to a computer, and that electrical wires and axles extended from it to the wheels. Not only that, but attached to the motorcycle's hood was a spherical camera and sensor designed to monitor the surrounding area in conjunction with GPS. "Were we on the highway all night while we were sleeping?" Morio could hardly believe it, but imagining them asleep on the highway, he felt a shiver go up his spine. But they had indeed flown over the Great Seto Bridge on the dream motorcycle as well. It could be that the motorcycle had started moving on its own in an effort to save Momotaru in real life and had run out of gas. But if so, then Uncle Momo's modifications aren't so silly after all, they're downright revolutionary. Web-based companies and automobile manufacturers worldwide were in competition to develop self-driving cars. Japan, previously one of the world's great auto manufacturing countries, had aimed to release this technology by the Tokyo Olympics in an effort to keep up with other countries, and it had brought domestic automobile manufacturers together to develop it. However, there were rumors that the technology was still incomplete, and Morio couldn't believe that a former delinquent with a small auto shop in the countryside could have developed it himself. The momotarist did know a thing or two about engines, for sure. I'll give them that, but Morio inspected what had been the robot heart's head in the dream world. The hardware is one thing, but I doubt that Uncle Momo could have written such a complex program by himself. The Momotaro Morio knew was a mechanic who silently took engines apart and put them back together. He knew some things about circuitry and electronics, but he'd certainly never seemed to be the programmer type. Once his train of thought had reached that point, Morio directed his gaze to the tablet and Joy, both placed carefully on the sidecar seat. Do you know how Uncle Momo used this tablet? But Joy, who had so articulately explained the mechanisms of his dream last night, said nothing. Morio. Huh? Morio was crouched at the front of the sidecar, lost in thought until Kokwon returned and pulled him back to reality. Kokwon pointed wordlessly at the top of the bridge behind Morio. A policeman was glaring at him. The motorcycle was stopped smack in front of a no parking sign. Sorry. It ran out of gas last night. Morio smiled stiffly, then hurriedly tugged the motorcycle away from the sign. Kokwon and Morio pushed the motorcycle turned hunk of iron, in search of a gas station that was open in the morning, and they finally found one after a mile or two. Being more of an indoors, science type of person, Morio was exhausted, while Kokwon hadn't broken a sweat. She operated the self-service machine and handed him a 10,000 yen bill. Pay for the gas with this, would you? She said, then took the burlap bag containing Joy and the tablet to the waiting room. Doesn't hesitate to use me, does she? Bet she can ride this motorcycle just fine herself, he thought, watching her go before he started pumping the gas. Kokwon checked Momotaro's tablet in the air-conditioned waiting room. I wonder if Dad's read my message. Momotaro had not replied to her note on the social networking app last night. It had no read feature, so there was no way of knowing whether he had even seen it. Anxious, Kokwon decided to write another message to her father. Where are you, Dad? I haven't given them the tablet, don't worry, we're refueling near Dotonbori. And enter. Kokwon stared at the screen, her cheeks puffed in frustration, but no reply came. She was getting less concerned about her father and more irritated at him for being lazy and not noticing her messages. Come on, Dad, what are you doing? Reply if you're okay already. Morio finished refueling and replaced the nozzle. His phone rang. When he pulled it out of his pocket, he found multiple missed calls, all from his dad. Hello. He answered the phone as he headed toward the waiting room. Morio, where are you? Asked Saatari. Well. His old man didn't usually care what he did. But this was not a situation to be taken lightly. And no wonder his dad was worried. Morio had disappeared right after going to check on Kokwon, whose father had been arrested that very morning. He wondered how best to explain that they were now in Osaka, but Saatari asked before he could decide, where did you go afterward? Kokon's with you, right? Afterward? Quit foolin' around. We went all the way to Takamatsu to pick you up, and you were nowhere to be found. Then we had a run-in with the police, and it turned into a huge mess. Huh? Morio answered in surprise. It was exactly like the dream. When Morio didn't reply, Saatari lowered his voice and said, but never mind that. Let me speak to Kokwon. Despite his misgivings, Morio handed the phone to Kokwon. It's my old man. What is it? Hi, Kokwon. There's a real shady character over here right now. Huh? A certain man's face popped up in Kokon's head at the phrase, shady character. The guy with the beard? Why yeah. Him. Yesterday, Saatari had heard about Momotaro's arrest from Kajita, and he'd gone to the Morikawa home right after work was over. Morio had come to see her with a bento box, but they were both gone, and while Saatari was busy wondering what had happened, Kajita had arrived. That was when Kokwon had gotten in touch with Saatari and told him to come pick them up in Takamatsu, so the two had headed for the shrine in Sawatari's car. But the kids hadn't been there either. The local police had then come by and informed them they were looking for a girl who had stolen a tablet at Takamatsu Airport, and the conversation had turned into a fight. Saatari and Kajita had both suspected the girl was Kokwon. But they had said nothing. And this morning, the man claiming his tablet had been stolen had stopped by and was ordering them to return it. Kajita is talking to the bearded guy at the door right now. Saatari was calling Kokwon from a hiding place in the workshop. He says he's here on behalf of your grandfather. Looks like there's something really complicated going on. But my grandpa died when I was in grade school. On Ikumi's side, not Momo's. Kokon's eyes opened wide when she heard her mother's name. My mom's? Yeah. I was surprised when I heard that, too. Sounds like your grandfather is the chairman of Shirjima Motors. Kokwon gulped despite herself and looked at Morio. Remembering their discussion the night before. I think my mom's maiden name might have been Shirjima. Keeping an eye on Watanabe's behavior, Saatari continued his conversation with Kokwon from the workshop's corner. It seems Momo had some good reasons for not talking about Ikumi. Like what? Apparently, Uncle Momo and Ikumi eloped. After that, they were forced to promise not to have anything to do with the Shirjima family whatsoever. But as Kokwon learned the details of her parents' marriage, the story felt almost as if it were about total strangers, and yet he had the gall to steal data from Shirjima, of all things. While Saatari and Kokwon were talking, Watanabe had abruptly ended his conversation with Kajita and come into the house. My dad isn't a thief, you know, Kokwon said with conviction. Her father often acted grumpy, spoke tactlessly, and created misunderstandings, but he hated injustice. Though he didn't trouble himself to do much parenting for Kokwon, he had always taught her that while she was allowed to be mischievous, she should never steal. Kokwon couldn't imagine he would ever rob someone. But Watanabe scoffed. I wonder, he coldly replied. Saatari took his phone back and said, Kokwon, we believe in Momo, too. But we need that tablet you have to prove his innocence. That's right, Watanabe said to both of them, fixing Saatari with a glare. If you hand over the tablet, Chairman Shirjima will drop the charges, otherwise your father will be charged with a very serious crime. Watanabe smirked. Kokon's expression was frozen, but she had inherited her father's stubbornness, so she did not mince words in her reply. In that case, I'll meet with Chairman Shirjima myself and prove to him that my dad isn't that kind of person. What? Watanabe stammered. Clearly panicking. The chairman won't see you. Why not? Because that he still holds a grudge against Morikawa. Saatari was astonished at how flustered Watanabe had become. On the other hand, Kokwon showed no signs of wavering. But I'm this Shirjima guy's granddaughter, right? No, well. That's true, but... Kokwon jumped to her feet with a bam. My dad may be a former delinquent, and he may be kinda childish, but he does the right thing. And so will I. Goodbye. She hung up. Watanabe could only grind his teeth on the other end. Damn it. These Morikawas never do what I ask. He jabbed a finger at Saatari, who was not his subordinate, and shouted, Hey, you. Call that girl back. There's no point, Saatari replied with a laugh. Kokon's just like Momo. Once she's made up her mind, there's no convincing her otherwise. Watanabe clicked his tongue. Let's go, he snapped at his assistants. This is why I hate these rubes. Kijita and Saatari watched Watanabe leave and grinned at each other. Nice work, Kokwon. Yeah. She's Gruff Track's daughter, all right. Kokon's anger didn't subside even after she returned Morio's phone to him. Everything in me is telling me not to like that bearded guy. After getting his phone back, Morio noticed something fishy happening in front of them. Hey, Kokwon. Check him out. Their eyes locked with a pale-faced man in work clothes standing next to the gas pumps. Perhaps because Morio had spotted him, the man was suspiciously retreating to the side of the fat man standing behind him, presumably his companion. The fat man turned away in a panic, but Morio and Kokwon could see the word Shijima Motors Osaka Technical Research Facility printed on the car beside them. The only reason people from Shijima would be there was Kokwon and the tablet. Beardy's friends, huh? Gah. What do we do? Morio had an epiphany. Okay. Go to sleep. Right now. Wait, why? Why? You can use magic in your dreams, can't you? I mean, I can't right now. I just woke up. Like that would stop you. You're always sleeping. Morio was half joking, but Kokwon was earnestly defending herself. Seriously? He thought, but he immediately started thinking of another plan. First, since the men were both focused on Kokwon, Morio sneaked out of the waiting room, alone. He crawled away from where they could see him and made his way to the fully fueled Heart. You go home without us. If the motorcycle had driven itself all this way, then Heart should be able to drive back to Shimatsui unassisted. Morio tapped the home button on the autopilot menu and started the engine. The motorcycle rolled forward, with no passengers. Heart wheeled itself out of the gas station, turned, signals flashing, and drove off at a safe pace. Go, Heart, Morio whispered from behind a pillar. The two men, noticing that Heart had suddenly left the gas station, chased after it in a panic. Damn it. Once they were gone, Morio went to get Kokwon from her hiding place, in the waiting room. As soon as she realized Heart was nowhere to be found, she worriedly asked him, "Where's Dad's bike?" "Don't worry, trust me," he urged Kokwon on despite her uncertainty, and the two ran in the opposite direction of Heart. After a while, the men in work clothes returned to the gas station. The two didn't appear to get regular exercise. Shoulders heaving, they peered into the waiting room to find that Kokwon and Morio had disappeared. Dismayed, they both pulled out their phones to contact someone. Kokwon and Morio hailed a taxi on one of the main roads and arrived at Shin Osaka Station about 10 minutes later. Kokwon paid the cab fare and chased after Morio, who had already run inside the station. Morio was inspecting the bullet train timetables. "Morio, do you have some money?" "I only have 650 yen left." "What?" yelped Morio as he looked for an open seat. Kokwon had spent her money from mahjong on gasoline for Heart, the taxi fare, and highway tolls, among other things, so she was nearly broke. "I don't have any." "But you're a college student. How do you not have any money?" "I mean, well, I was only stopping by yesterday, and besides, college guys don't have money these days." That's a given. A lack of funds wasn't something to be proud of, but he still stubbornly held that his lack of a part-time job was evidence of his dedication to his studies. He was proud of that, at least. "How were you planning to get to Tokyo without Heart?" asked Kokwon, perfectly oblivious to Morio's pride. "I was relying on you to pay." Pretty shameless. He hung his head in apology. Kokwon sighed. "I know. What if we use the beard guy's money?" Morio pointed at Watanabe's attaché case, but Kokwon immediately and firmly replied, "Nope. That'd be stealing." This was true, but Morio was pained to think Kokwon insisted on adhering to her father's rigid morals even against an adversary who was already using underhanded methods. "So what'll we do?" As if to interrupt Morio's question, a notification sound chirped from the tablet in the sack on Kokon's back. She lowered the bag with Joy's head, poking out, and took out the device to check the app. It's from Dad. At long last, a reply from Momotaru had appeared on the timeline. Kokon's face brightened. Where are you, Kokwan? The lone sentence suggested he wanted to hear about their situation, before explaining his own. We're at Shin Osaka Station. We're coming to rescue you. Kokwan hastily wrote her response and sent it. Stay there. Huh? Yelped Kokwan at the unexpected reply. Was he not telling them where he was because he didn't want to worry them? I'm with Morio. Don't have money, can't get on the bullet train. Kokwan gave him information about their situation, unable to do much else. This time, no reply came for a while. Getting impatient, she wrote, again, where are you, Dad? After some time, the response came, wait there. Something's off. Morio cocked his head. Momotaru had said nothing of his own situation and merely repeated his instructions to wait. Even if he was worried about Kokwan, the lack of a detailed explanation or further directions was strange. The two stood there for a while, their heads full of question marks, until Kokwan couldn't take it anymore and sent another message. I want to go to Tokyo on the bullet train. No response. Kokwan hummed, and just then, a female train station employee came running up to them. Are you Kokwan Morikawa? Huh? Kokwan started at the sound of her name. The woman held a small envelope out to Kokwan and explained kindly. We were asked to hold on to bullet train tickets in your name. Huh? Kokwan and Morio exclaimed. The envelope contained 2 reserved seat tickets that read Shin Osaka Tokyo. What? Can you explain what's going on? Morio asked the woman, perplexed. But the woman, equally puzzled, didn't seem to know either. It was nearly time for the train on their tickets to depart, and Kokwan decided to go for it rather than try to understand what was happening. She opened the envelope and handed a ticket to Morio, then picked up Watanabe's attaché from the ground and handed it to the employee. Somebody dropped this. Would you mind giving it to the police? Kokwan said. Picking up the bag containing Joy and the tablet and making a dash for their train, Hey. Morio frantically chased after her. He slipped the ticket through the turnstile, snatched the stub out with annoyance, and sprinted up the stairs. Just as he made it to the platform, the departure bell rang shrilly. Kokwan and Morio squeezed through the closing doors and into the car. As they caught their breath in the vestibule, the train departed for Tokyo. When they found their designated seats, Kokwan gently bounced herself on the cushions as if to test the springs. Whoa! It's my first time on a bullet train. Morio sat beside the hyperactive girl. What is happening? He wondered, in tired amazement. They had gotten on the train without thinking, but they had no idea who had purchased these seats for them or why. Kokwan took Joy out of her bag and giddily asked, You think this is magic, Joy? But we're not in a dream. Morio wasn't so sure. Kokwan showed him the tablet. But I texted, I want to go to Tokyo, and my wish came true. She said, smiling. Let me test it out again. She pulled up the social networking app. I'm hungry. And I want a bento box. Enter. Morio was half hopeful and half bemused as he watched her innocent behavior, but lightning struck twice. The woman pushing the food cart stopped by and handed Kokwan and Morio bento boxes, informing them that they had already been paid for, along with 2 bottles of tea. Yes. I don't know how, but I can use magic in real life. Like hell you can. Kokwan was even more elated at confirming she could use magic. Morio, in contrast, remained skeptical. I'll admit, these things that keep happening to us do seem magical, but it's gotta be some kind of trick. Morio turned to the vendor. Who paid for these? She replied with nothing but her beautiful, professional smile and pushed her cart onward. Maybe our benefactor told her not to say anything. It could be. No, there's no doubt. Unsatisfied, Morio stared at the bento boxes. Kokwon had already begun to dig in. "You gonna eat, Morio?" she asked, grinning ear to ear. She picked up the tablet lying next to her and wrote her father another message. The bento came. "We're heading to Tokyo on the bullet train." As Kokwon tapped enter, she looked like a girl getting ready to go on a field trip. "They're on a bullet train? I thought they didn't have any money." "That's what I thought." Officer Koyama was the one who found Kokon's messages on the social networking app. Watanabe had called him after leaving the Morikawa home, searching for clues on her location. In accordance with Watanabe's instructions, Officer Koyama had sent the messages, "Where are you?" and "Stay there," but despite his efforts, Kokwon was nearing Shijima's headquarters in Tokyo. "I have no choice but to get to headquarters first and stop them myself, Watanabe thought. "Tell me if she writes anything else," he said to Officer Koyama as he walked up the ramp to the company's private jet. "That I hope you aren't mistaking the police for your personal henchmen." Officer Koyama crossly replied, "We pay our taxes, and if anything, we're assisting in the investigation." "What are you complaining about, exactly?" Watanabe retorted before hanging up and telling the pilot to head to Haneda Airport. Officer Koyama folded his cell phone and shoved it into his pocket. "Who does he think he is?" Officer Tsukamoto handed his seething colleague a cup of vending machine coffee. The pair analyzed the facts of the Momotaro Morikawa/Shirjima Motors case over their drinks. Momotaro Morikawa had graduated from a technical high school in Okayama and immediately moved to Tokyo to serve as a contractor at Shirjima Technical Research Facility, a division of Shirjima Motors. Around that time, he had happened to meet Ikumi Shirjima, chairman, Shijima's daughter, and the two had married in no time. It was a well-kept secret how a mere contractor came to wed the next president of Shirjima Motors. Ikumi's relationship with her father had already been strained, and her marriage hadn't been covered by the media. Only a select few knew of it at all. Ikumi and Momotaro's married life had lasted only a year, until Ikumi had perished in an accident. Soon after the event, Momotaro had returned to Okayama with the infant Kokwon. Though Ikumi's death had been purely an accident, not many knew the couple had had a child, which meant Kokon's birth had not been cause for celebration among Shijima's upper echelon despite her Shirjima blood, or so the officers reasoned. But why had Momotaro Morikawa suddenly stolen Shirjima Motors' data after almost 18 peaceful years in the countryside? Watanabe had said that Momotaro had likely needed a large sum of money to pay for his daughter's college education. But based on the expenditure and income records they had obtained, the Morikawas didn't seem particularly strapped for cash, and Kokwon had an educational endowment insurance plan. After a second review of Momotaro's motives, Koyama couldn't stand it anymore and voiced his doubts. "Do you think Morikawa really stole the data?" Tsukamoto had the same misgivings and grunted in agreement. "There's not much we can do as long as he refuses to talk to us." Right. Ever since the officers had taken his phone, Momotaro had refused to say another word, as though he was steadfastly guarding something from them. Based on his records, Momotaro's life had suggested he was honest, if awkward, and something about him told Tsukamoto, who had seen many criminals in his time, that this man was innocent. Morio was unable to suppress his hunger as he watched Kokwon voraciously wolfing down her bento box, and he opened his own. Once he had eaten about half of it and calmed down a little, he took his AR goggles from his bag and put them on. He had only surface-level knowledge of Shirjima Motors and its chairman, Isshin Shirjima, so he wanted to dig deeper. That this is Mom's father. Yup. After syncing Kokon's tablet so she could see the search results as well, Morio typed on the virtual keyboard. He had seen Isshin Shijima's face only a few times on the news, so he remembered it vaguely. Kokwon, on the other hand, hadn't even known Shirjima Motors existed. Isshin Shirjima is the founder and current chairman of the Japanese automobile manufacturer Shirjima Motors. Morio read from the Shirjima Motors Wikipedia page. It was unclear how much Kokwon had heard. She was busy intensely peering at Isshin Shijima's photos. In every picture, Isshin's expression was severe, and he projected an aura of unapproachability. He looked so scary. "I'm not a fan of having him as my grandpa," commented Kokwon. But her scrolling stopped when she reached one particular photo. It was from an auto show 20 years ago. Isshin was being mobbed by microphones and tape recorders, and behind him, a lonely-looking Ikumi Shijima was staring at some documents. "Your mom graduated from Carnegie Mellon in the United States and immediately became an employee of the company. But a year before her death, she left Shijima Motors because of a falling out with her father, the chairman." They did another image search but found nothing for Ikumi Shijima, other than the picture Kokwon had already found. Kokwon gave up on finding more images of her mother and asked Morio the next question that naturally came to her mind: what about Dad? Morio sifted through all the information on Wikipedia, even the claims, marked citation needed, but found nothing on Momotaru, nothing. Which means this falling out must have been your mother's marriage to Uncle Momo. Ha! Kokwon made a sound of slight disappointment and went back to looking at Ikumi's photo. The only daughter of the founder of one of Japan's greatest companies, a genius who had established herself as its successor at a young age, immediately after graduating from one of the top universities in the United States. Mom was an amazing person. Even Kokwon had to take a step back in awe of her mother, who had lived in a completely different world. Morio noticed, "My dad's amazing, too, isn't he? I mean, he married her. Or maybe he had thought too much." Kokwon wasn't so much taking a step back as she was hurtling toward her. "Well, yeah, I guess. Ugh, eternally positive, aren't you?" Morio honestly admired her. "I wonder how Mom and Dad met and ended up marrying." Kokwon's thoughts turned toward her parents' romance. "Morio, look up where Shijima Motors is, would you?" "Huh?" Morio lifted his AR goggles up and stared at Kokwon, who had been lost in a fantasy about the romance between her parents not a moment ago. As if, called by some unseen force, she descended into the world of her dreams. Heartland was covered in a thick blanket of fog just before dawn. In the middle of it stood Ancien and Peach. They had avoided Biwan's ambush thanks to Heart's heroics and returned to Heartland from Hill Mountain to fulfill their objective. The roads were usually congested, 24 hours a day, but there were no cars now, perhaps due to the kingdom-wide curfew imposed because of the demon's repeated onslaughts. After observing Heartland Castle from a good vantage point with her binoculars, Ancien asked Peach to drive Heart at the engine heads who stood guarding the castle gates, toward that one. With a grunt of affirmation, Peach revved the engine loudly and hurtled in the direction of one of the machines. Hidden in the fog, Heart ran through the downtown area. The streets were littered with rubble from the buildings destroyed by the demon. Ancien sorrowfully took in the sight. This wouldn't have happened if she had completed the spell of spirit earlier. Regret welled up in her throat, but she managed to swallow it and face forward again. Ancien and Peach sneaked through the thinly patrolled streets. Once they had made it to the engine head's feet, they left Heart and climbed the ladder left next to the machine, intending to make it inside. The engine head's interiors had control rooms for each body part, connected by passageways that ran every which way. Ancien opened the entry hatch and infiltrated the duct-like corridors. With Joy on her shoulder, and Peach behind her, she made her way forward on all fours. Finally, they reached a ladder running perpendicular to their path, and above, they could hear the voices of men. They had found the engine head's bridge. Ancien and Joy climbed the ladder and peered into the bridge from the entrance. They could see the captain's back between two consoles. A large window stood before him, and Heartland's Gulf area was visible beyond it. In front of the window were several control panels, and multiple pilots sat, ready to launch, peering keenly at the view outside. Thanks to that, not a single person was looking back. Seizing the opportunity, Ancien scanned the bridge and found what she was looking for, a switchboard connected to the engine head's main computer. Now's our chance. Ancien signaled Peach, and they crawled into the bridge on their forearms. They opened the switchboard's panel, disconnected the cables, and attached the magic tablet to it. Joy had leaped from Ancien's shoulder and was gazing at her to spur her on. Peach put his hand on Ancien's shoulder to give her courage. The two had returned to Heartland to download the completed spirit. Spell into the engine head and defeat the demon, Captain. The demon has appeared. A pilot yelled, and a thrill of anxiety washed over the bridge. Peach kept his hand on Ancien's shoulder and glanced sharply toward the source of the voice. It seemed so. The captain was acting calm, but he was trembling in fear, on the inside. This creature's might had already felled one of the kingdom's 3 engine heads. Peach rose slightly and looked out the window to see the demon making a beeline for the other engine head a distance away. The sinister black giant began forcing the engine head to the ground. Clearly, they were struggling. Captain, shouldn't we assist Unit 2? Asked the steersman. The captain's anger surfaced as he yelled, "Oh, our mission is to protect this gate with our lives. We must not move from this spot." Peach realized the captain's fear was making him want to run away. He couldn't help but wonder aloud, when are you going to fight that demon if not now? The country was filled with people who had stopped thinking independently and simply followed the king's orders. Peach turned back to Ancien and urged her to use her magic to shine a ray of light into a land frozen in its old ways. This is a chance for the king to accept the power of magic. Yeah. Ancien typed the spell of spirit into the tablet. With spirit alone, we can soar. Mechanical giant, combat the demon with your own will. Send. The tablet suddenly started overflowing with light. The same light spilled from the instruments on the bridge, and luminous threads ran between them as if creating a new network. The pilots all shouted in surprise, but before they had a moment to react, the light was coursing through the entire engine head. The enormous machine, shrouded with a magical glow, took a step without anybody moving it. Hey, what's going on? Why did its leg just move? The captain cried out, shocked that the engine head was advancing independent of his orders. With each step, the giant's movements became smoother and more rapid. It ran toward the demon, faster and faster, as if unable to contain its joy at being able to walk and run of its own volition. Ancien, Peach, and Joy looked at one another. Well done, Ancien. Yeah. The captain's face was getting whiter with every word. Hey, stop it, stop moving on your own. For him, it was more important not to make a mistake than to fight the demon. He grabbed the microphone and yelled into it in desperation. Both legs. Pull the brakes. Hearing this, Ancien leaped up from behind the console where she was hiding. You can't. The captain spun around. It's fighting with its own will. This battle belongs to it. Who are you? It's a magic user. Not only the captain but the entire crew turned toward Ancien. The captain flushed bright red with embarrassment, convinced Ancien had ruined his image. Where did you come from? Throw them out. Joy came to her rescue. Such insolence. Ancien is a princess. The crew briefly hesitated but decided to charge Ancien and pin her down. Ancien swiftly dodged their bodies and put the tablet in her bag, but Joy was hurled aside in the process. Peach jumped out in Joy's stead. Don't get in our way. Peach grappled with the pilots and flung them across the room as they came, one by one, unflinching even when they punched him. This wouldn't end well. Still red-faced, the captain screamed, hysterically. All divisions, stop this crazy thing. Despite their confusion, the steersmen in the arm and leg stations slammed on the brakes as the intercom had ordered, Grey-AF. The steersmen desperately gritted their teeth, and the brakes, not designed for this sort of load, screeched and began to smoke. Sweat poured down the men's foreheads, but the engine head wouldn't stop. Sprinting through the town, it let the momentum carry it toward the demon and raised its right arm to take it. Down, the captain saw no choice but to use his last resort, kill the engine. He shrieked into the microphone. Before the captain could finish his order, the engine head's right arm came down on the demon with tremendous force and a speed that far surpassed anything the crew had managed. With one blow, the demon's head was split in two, and a red, lava-like substance flowed from the wound. The demon dropped to its knees, and the engine head raised his arm once more with the intent to deliver a finishing blow. Just then, the engine head's engine plug shot out from the deck in its head with a loud bang. Black smoke poured from the holes where the plugs had been, and the machine went still. The chief engineer had purged the engine plugs as per the captain's orders. The engine head, though powered by magic, could do nothing with its engine shut off. The captain grunted happily, even though he'd missed the chance to defeat the demon with just one more hit. Good job, crew. We will defend our post with our lives. What he intended to protect with an inoperative machine was unclear. Ancienne, unable to contain her anger, jumped to her feet. Peach had been watching the events unfold as his scuffle with the crew continued, and he called out to her. Ancienne, don't give up. Ancienne nodded to show she understood and, weaving through the crew members' arms, opened the bridge's window. A strong gust of wind swept in and blew away Ancienne's hat. Undeterred, she leaped out the window, but the engine head's deck was almost 500 feet from the ground, high enough to make anybody dizzy. Ancienne grabbed onto the ladder for dear life and began her climb toward the head. A powerful wind violently tugged at Ancienne's skirt, and she clutched at the ladder as she lost her balance. She looked down and saw the crouching demon, its head still split open. But lava continued to pour from its wound. It flowed over the injury as the demon attempted to heal itself. The demon's gonna come back. Ancienne climbed the ladder with renewed resolve. A girl watched this occur from a faraway building. Coke as she appeared in real life. Go, Ancienne. She whispered, before she sensed something strange. Wait, I'm in my dream as myself. Ordinarily, Coke would have appeared as Ancienne. Ancienne made it up the ladder and arrived at the deck. The engine head had frozen on a tilt, so the deck was also lopsided. There were no handrails or grips. The only objects protruding from the flat deck were the 6 engine plugs. They were huge up close, each one was more than 30 feet long. Ancienne made a dash for the plug closest to her. The exposed portion of each plug was grooved like a screw. If she pulled the emergency lever above each one, the plug would twist itself back into the machine, and the engine would run once more. Ancienne jumped up to grab the lever, which was high over her head, and pulled with all her weight. The handle came down, and the plug made a sound. Ancienne let go and dropped to the deck, before making her way to the next one. Behind her, the plug she had just activated was rotating into its hole. Yes. She pulled the next one with her body weight, then moved on to the next. Meanwhile, down at the bridge, Peach had taken down the crew members attempting to chase after Ancienne and was now leaping out the window. Kicking the crew members back into their cockpit, Peach started up the ladder toward Ancienne. Joy clung onto his back. They were not intimidated by the 500-foot height. They had decided to protect Ancienne no matter what, but the crew would not pursue them farther. No matter what the captain's orders were, their fear prevented them from stepping outside. Coke, who had slipped into the dream, saw that the demon at the engine head's feet was reforming its lava into an arm and reaching out for the mechanical giant. What should I do? Instinctively, Coke started running toward the engine head. Ancienne had not noticed the demon's actions, and she continued to pull the levers. Just one more. Once she triggered the last one, the engine head would roar back to life and deliver a final blow to the demon. The machine's victory, and the moment that Ancienne's magic would be of use to Heartland, was moments away. By the time Peach reached the deck, Ancienne had started toward the final plug. Peach waved his hand, and Ancienne waved back with a smile. She sprang onto the final lever, but at that moment, the demon's new arm grabbed the engine head's leg. The tilted structure further lost its balance. Ah! Ancien gripped the lever, swinging wildly back and forth as the great machine shuddered. Peach, too, was left dangling on the ladder by one hand. Kokwon gulped, dashing through her dream world. Yikes, I've gotta help them. But no matter how hard she ran, her body refused to advance. Kokwon looked up to check how Ancien and Peach were doing. Just then, a sense of déjà vu washed over her. Hey, I feel like this was the end of the fairy tale Dad told us. Clinging to Peach's neck, Joy could see that Ancien was swinging her body on the lever, trying to yank it down. If the plug were to fall into place, there wouldn't be anything for her to grab onto. Determined, Ancien threw her weight onto the lever, pulled it all the way down, and then let go. She slid down the steeply angled deck at a dangerous speed toward Peach. He would catch her, she knew, and she trusted her life to him, Ancien. Ancien pulled her tablet from her bag as she slid and jumped toward the voice, hanging from the deck with his left hand. Peach stretched out his right and grabbed the edge of the tablet in Ancien's hands. We did it. Ancien dangled with both hands from the tablet, which Peach still clutched. Joy inched down Peach's right arm in an attempt to help the girl. Joy's short arms were just shy of reaching her hands, but Ancien's fingers lost their grip and slipped down the tablet, managing to regain their hold at its very edge. Peach was supporting both his and Ancien's weights with one arm, and he was nearly at his limit. Guh. Peach poured the last of his strength into his right arm to try to pull Ancien up. At that moment, the tablet's screen cracked under the pressure. At this rate, the magic tablet, Ancien, Peach, and Joy would all be lost. Peach. As Peach ground his teeth together in his attempt to pull Ancien up, a soft voice called to him. Peach looked down with a gasp. Hanging from the tablet where Ancien had been was now Ikumi. Kokwon could see what Peach saw from where she stood. The mother she saw was not the one from the portrait back home, but the one she had seen on the internet, the lonely-looking Ikumi. Ikumi looked Peach and Joy in the eye and smiled warmly. Peach, I'm sorry that I couldn't stay with you until the end. But I'll come back whenever you need me. Take care of Kokwon until then. Peach understood everything from her tone of voice. She meant to fall from the tablet to save him and Joy. Ikumi let go, pride in herself for having tried to protect Heartland, sadness at not having been able to watch over Kokwon's growth, happiness at having entrusted everything to Peach. With all these feelings in her heart, Ikumi slowly fell. Mom.y. Kokwon bolted upright when she awoke from her dream. They were still on the bullet train. Tears welled in her open eyes and rolled down her face. Without even wiping them away, Kokwon reflected on her dream and what she had realized. I'd always thought that I was that story's main character. A long-forgotten memory re-emerged in Kokwon's mind, a time when Momotaru had been so close by Kokwon's side that she had hardly realized she didn't have a mother. Wake up. Daddy, stop sleeping. After a long day of work and childrearing, Momotaru often passed out in the living room until Kokwon shook him awake. Even then, Momotaru had always been willing to be Kokwon's playmate. He had tossed her up in the air and given her spare engine parts to play with. Kokwon had taken to thinking of the engine in the workshop as a castle, lining up cylinders in front of it and pretending they were robots guarding the castle. Model cars, too. Momotaru gave them all to her. Kokwon, now a paragon of health, had often had fevers when she was little. As she lay with Joy on her mattress, Momotaru would always come by with his tablet after work. He had called the cracked device his magic tablet. Momotaru had typed spells into the tablet using simple characters for Kokwon's benefit. With spirit alone, your fever will go away. The belief that her father could cure her fever with magic had been more effective than any medicine. Kokwon had read the tablet spell with him. With spirit alone, your fever will go away. Momotaru would hold Kokwon's hand and press it to the enter button. Enter. They said together, joy was always with her, fever or not. It was next to her when she went to sleep and was the first one Kokwon greeted upon waking. It was her best friend, who had seen her at her happiest and saddest. All because of her father, who had given her mother's precious joy to her. It had seen her mother through her highs and lows, as well. What's wrong? Can't sleep? Momotaru had told her the story of Ancien and the magic tablet on restless nights. The story of Peach and Ancien's first encounter. Their quest to slay the demon. Their various encounters with the many little people of the kingdom and subsequent friendships. The magic spells they thought up to give life to their friends and the engine head. How they left the kingdom with their magic tablet and settled in Hill Mountain, and this is that tablet. When Momotaru told these stories, he seemed proud and happy but also lonely. After the elopement and Ikumi's death, Momotaru had cut all ties with Shirjima. But he had told Kokwon what an intelligent, honest, wonderful woman Ikumi was through his stories, hoping his daughter would grow up to be the same. It was thanks to these stories about Ikumi that Kokwon was able to sleep easy those nights. It had been right there the entire time, all around her. She hadn't even really thought about these things, because she took them for granted. At long last, it all made sense to her and came together within Kokwon. Dad. I always wondered why you never told me anything about Mom. She drew a shuddery breath in and let it out slowly. Her lips trembled. But you were always telling me so much about her. Kokwon wiped away the overflowing tears and faced forward. Morio was going back and forth, unsure of what to say to her after she had immediately started crying once she woke up. Morio, where are we? She asked. The bullet train had left Shinagawa and was on its way to Tokyo Station. Seeing the Tokyo Tower from the train's window, Kokwon truly felt they had at last arrived in Tokyo. She had only ever seen the metropolis on television. She had never seen buildings so tall back at home, and they were racing past her one after the next. Just a little longer, and they would be at Shirjima Motors and find her grandfather, the man who had misunderstood her dad and disowned her mom. After disembarking from the train, the two did a search on Morio's phone for another train they could take to Shirjima headquarters. It was in an area facing Tokyo Bay, and it would take 460 yen and one transfer to get to the nearest station, Daiba. It would take 920 yen for the two to get there. Not to mention the ride back. Morio and Kokwon searched their wallets. Even with Kokon's 650 yen, it wasn't enough. You could get there if you went alone. Do you feel like trying the magic tablet again? Kokwon hummed at Morio's suggestion. Then, for the third time, a stranger called out to them, "Are you Kokwon Morikawa?" Kokwon lifted her face and saw a middle-aged man with round glasses, smiling awkwardly at her, wringing his hands. At his sides were a fat man and a pallid man. Kokwon didn't recognize any of them, but they wore the same clothes as the pair from the gas station in Osaka. Are they with that bearded guy? Morio instinctively raised his hands and put himself in between Kokwon and the men. He had no confidence in his physical prowess, but he summoned his courage and called, "Kokwon, go. I'll take care of this." But Kokwon was unsure, but Morio had decided that without the money for a train ticket, all he could do was hold off these men. "It'll be okay. You have the tablet. But what'll you do, Morio?" Though she was grateful, Kokwon saw a reason to be far more concerned about Morio's sudden theatrics. At the same time, she did have priorities. Perhaps sensing Kokon's conflict, or perhaps not, Morio made another dramatic declaration before the enemy could regain their lost ground. "Don't worry about me, Kokwon, and run." He charged at the three, not believing for a second that he would win. "Whoa. You've got us all wrong." The man with glasses backed away, and raised his arms to shield himself. "All wrong my ass," Morio said, eyes closed and fists swinging. the man began apologetically, and Morio heard the sincerity in his voice. He stopped, looked up, and followed the man's finger pointing, behind him. Kokwon was no longer there, speeding down the stairs at the far end of the station. What? I'm being so brave, and she's not even watching. Morio's confidence crumbled. Still, he had managed to intimidate the men into stopping their pursuit of Kokwon, and he desperately grabbed at the one with glasses. Although at this point it was more an act to preserve his dignity than anything else, as Morio squeezed his neck, the spectacled man rasped, would you mind listening to us? Shut it. The two other men gave up on pursuing Kokwon and started pulling Morio away from their friend. We've come here to save Mr. Momotaru, the spectacled man choked out. What? Morio's arms relaxed for a second, and the two men took the chance to seize him by the armpits. But you're from Shijima Motors, aren't you? As Morio's hostility showed no sign of abating, the spectacled man took his phone from his pocket and showed him its home screen. The man's phone had an app marked with a skull on it, the same as Momotaru's tablet, that icon. That's right. It's for the application Ancient Heart, the app we created, with Momotaru for automobile enthusiasts everywhere to secretly communicate. Morio saw the timeline and finally understood. I see. You've been reading the messages Kokwon wrote on the app. Morio still didn't completely trust them, but now that he knew these men were responsible for the miracle in Osaka, he felt his blood cooling. Yes, we have. Thanks to those messages, we were able to beat Watanabe to the punch and ready the bullet train tickets and bento boxes for you. Morio had now learned the trick behind the magic, albeit from an unexpected source, but he still had many questions. Why were different people, all from Shijima Motors, variously trying to steal the tablet and keep it safe, but doesn't Shijima Motors want the tablet? The spectacled man nodded at the straightforward question. That's true, but Ms. Ikumi left an impact on those of us in the resistance. We don't want Watanabe to have what's on it. This group calling themselves the Resistance belonged to the Shijima Technical Research Group, and they mainly performed electrical work. We used to work with Mr. Momotaru, the man started, beginning his story. Back then, the most important parts of automobile manufacturing were said to be engine design, development, the chassis design, and overall design. Engineers who worked with electronics and other materials were treated as if they were a rung lower on the ladder, even though they were working on the same cars. But in recent years, due to the universality of the internet, the automobile industry reached a point where it could not go without integrating information technology into its designs. Ikumi Shijima, who had foreseen this 20 years earlier, had advocated the view that their company should free itself of the shackles of the past and begin incorporating IT. But her views clashed with her father's, and she was thrown out of the company's main branch. Ikumi had chosen to entrust her ideas to the Shijima Technical Research Group, which had handled all of Shijima Motors' electrical work. The man in glasses recounted his story keenly, as though meditating on the time gone by. To this day, we still admire Ms. Ikumi for entrusting her intelligence to mere workers like us. And we still revere Momotaru Morikawa as a legend of engineering and the man she opened her heart to. We keep in contact with him to this day, and that's why we're here to help you in his time of need. And you use the app? Yes. But after his treatment at Shijima's hands, it seems Momotaru isn't too fond of us, the man in glasses said self-deprecatingly. Looking down, not much we can do about that. Anybody would feel that way after Shijima legally cut all ties with them, the fat man added. Right after Mr. Momotaru and Ms. Ikumi got married, Watanabe made them promise never to claim the right to anything against Shijima. He was Shijima's lawyer at the time. He always looked down on people working in our field. Nobody liked him. And he's the director of the company now, so as you can imagine, we're not really motivated to work, continued the pallid man. Now that he understood how things had gotten to this point, Morio opened his mouth to speak. Then what does the tablet contain? Why would someone with Watanabe's status risk so much to get his hands on it? The tablet contains Ikumi's original code for self-driving cars. Ha! Hearing this, Morio realized how Momotaro's self-driving vehicles could be considered magic. Morio had been considering the possibility as an explanation ever since he'd read Ikumi's profile on the bullet train, but this had confirmed it. I see now. Uncle Momo had the magic spell from the start, he muttered. That's right, the man in glasses said. But Mr. Momotaro was the one who used the program to create an actual self-driving vehicle. It's an admirable feat. Not even those of us at Shirjima Motors have managed to create a standalone, self-driving car, commented the fat man. Morio was reminded of the company's plan to have the athletes ride self-driving cars at the Tokyo Olympics opening ceremony. So does that mean? Yes. The self-driving cars for the Olympics aren't finished. That's why Watanabe needs Mr. Momotaro's tablet. All the pieces had finally come together. He understood why Momotaro had suddenly been arrested, how he must have felt in custody. Let's go save Uncle Momo. Morio enthusiastically invited the men in work clothes to join forces with him. Kokwon had managed to transfer to the Yurikamome line and was on her way to Daiba. She had never ridden a train this smooth in her life, and the sheer number of people around her was overwhelming. The rainbow bridge outside the window drew her gaze. She thought of the Great Seto Bridge back at home and imagined it superimposed on the bridge her mother had seen all those years ago. Although the images didn't line up, the train arrived at Daiba station in no time. Luckily, Shirjima Motors headquarters was right by the station, and Kokwon made it there without getting lost. She walked into the lobby of the giant building with an enormous S logo affixed high on its side. The lobby's ceiling was open to the top floor. Banners hung in the air. The same 5 colors as the Olympic rings. The lobby functioned as a showcase for famous cars manufactured by Shirjima Motors, as well as shiny concept vehicles. Perhaps because it was the first day of summer vacation before the Olympics, the lobby was full of television crews holding cameras, mass media personnel, and families with children. A little boy sat on his father's shoulders, pointing at the open ceiling. Kokwon looked to see what had caught his interest. A balloon of the Shirjima Motors mascot and its giant wings floated above, and from its neck hung a banner announcing Shirjima Motors as an official sponsor of the Tokyo Olympics. They mentioned that on the news yesterday morning, Kokwon remembered languidly. Back then, she never would have thought she'd be in Tokyo now. Kokwon's eyes were drawn to the motto written on the top of the banner, "With spirit alone, we can soar." The same words were written on the metal sheet at Morikawa Motors workshop. That's the same motto as ours. Idiot! Where's your nerve? Ishin Shijima's angry shouts resounded through the chairman's office. Several direct subordinates of the president had come into the room to give instructions to the chairman in person. They stood around his desk, their heads hanging. The issue was with the self-driving cars scheduled to be released at the Olympics 2 days from now. Now, of all times, the president's employees had expressed their opposition to the idea of putting the athletes in autonomous vehicles at the opening ceremony, concerned that they could not risk failure in front of the whole world at the Olympics. According to the chairman's representatives, if Shirjima Motors could unveil the world's first self-driving cars at the Olympics, the company's impact on the world would be immeasurable. According to him, this was the best chance for the company, which was currently on a downhill slide at the mercy of its competitors' prices and technological advancements, to once again become the world-famous Shirjima. He had personally convinced the workers who wanted more than anything to take safety precautions and encouraged engineers to put all their efforts into the project. Seeing the chairman's intense and almost possessed passion, the old guard had felt an uneasiness. Their downhill slide had started when Ishin had stepped down as president and installed himself as chairman, and there, next in line, Ikumi had left the company. Their anxiety was related to how the chairman had personally opposed the production of self-driving cars, when Ikumi had proposed it almost 20 years ago, but the Olympics are only 2 days away. If a car carrying an athlete were to have an accident, Shijima wouldn't just be embarrassed. The mass media are already reporting this might happen. We need to allow drivers in the cars. Chairman Shijima's expression did not change in the slightest at the president's objections. He stared out the window and declared, "No. We will conduct the opening ceremony with self-driving cars." Though he was now only the chairman, Isshin Shijima was still the man who had built this company from the ground up. The men stood there, lifelessly, wondering whether their company was destined to fail because this old man wanted to atone for his behavior toward his late daughter. "That I've made up my mind. Stop wasting time." Chairman Shijima continued staring out the window, not even bothering to turn back to the president and his employees. After he left the chairman's office, the president was too irritated to go back to his own room. Instead, he went to the lobby and called Watanabe, who had returned to Haneda Airport by private jet and should have been on his way back to Shijima headquarters. It was only 2 weeks ago that Watanabe had told him how Ikumi had completed the program for self-driving cars 20 years ago. The people of Shijima Motors had believed that Ikumi's death in an accident while testing a self-driving car had been due to a flaw in the programming. In truth, the cause had been a collision brought about by an unrelated automobile, but Shijima Motors had chosen to pin the accident on Momotaru Morikawa, her co-inventor. Watanabe, who had overseen the legal aftermath of the accident back then, had ordered Momotaru to relinquish his rights, saying that in return, Shijima Motors wouldn't press charges. But Momotaru had told him he would never hand over his daughter, Kokwon, nor Ikumi's original code. Watanabe, distracted by the idea that Ikumi's child might eventually become Shijima's heir, had agreed to let Momotaru have the original code, but when the flaws in the self-driving car for the Olympics had become apparent, Watanabe, who had heard rumors that Momotaru had perfected the technology, remembered the existence of Ikumi's original code and decided to take it for himself. They would get their hands on the code and complete the self-driving car in time for the Olympics, unbeknownst to the chairman. That was how Watanabe and his followers planned to protect Shijima Motors' image while ousting the chairman and taking his place. Watanabe answered the phone. "Well?" The president asked impatiently. "Have you obtained the original code?" "Soon. Don't be so reckless. You're being too obvious." It was one thing to use Shijima Motors' private jet, but involving the police was a dangerous gamble. It increased the chances of the media catching on, but Watanabe simply laughed and brushed him off. "Can't afford to play it safe. If our demonstration at the Olympics doesn't go well, we'll be affected, too. Some risk is unavoidable. We'll just have to take care of the rest with money." But the chairman is repenting for his misdeeds toward his late daughter. He isn't interested in the future of autonomous vehicles. After the Olympics, we'll get rid of him on those grounds. Out with the old and in with the new, which is us. Watanabe laughed unapologetically. But first and foremost, we need the Olympics to go well. In truth, Watanabe was even more concerned than the president. "I won't let that bumpkin girl ruin my future." Watanabe had become so irrational that he remained totally unaware of how his actions were turning him into a villain in a low-budget television drama. With spirit alone, we can soar. Kokwon stared at the banner for a while, but then she remembered why she had come here, and she headed to the lobby's reception desk. 3 women sat at the desk, looking exactly like the epitome of receptionists for a large corporation. Kokwon found them difficult to approach. She felt she would immediately betray her country upbringing. Kokwon chose the happiest looking of the women and tried speaking to her. I would like to meet with Chairman Shijima, please," said Kokwon, being careful not to let her accent slip in. The receptionist observed Kokwon's face, then looked her over all the way down to her fingertips before returning her gaze to Kokwon's face. Bleached brown hair, and those short skirts all the high schoolers are wearing these days. "Who is this yokel?" Fully masking her thoughts, the receptionist smiled at Kokwon. "And for what purpose?" "I'm Chairman Shijima's granddaughter. I'm here about my father." Kokwon took an honest approach, partially because she couldn't think of anything better. The receptionist couldn't help but react to Kokwon's bold assertion. She knit her brows and, lowering her voice, replied condescendingly, "That isn't very funny. The chairman's daughter passed away long ago." "I know, but..." Though Kokwon had not uttered a single lie earlier, she didn't know how she might better explain the circumstances. She searched frantically for something else to say, but finally, she opted for "I'm sorry, I'll be back," and left the lobby. Another receptionist, overhearing their conversation, glanced at Kokwon to see which way she was going. She then whipped out her phone and tapped its screen. A skull icon, the same one the resistance used, was on its menu. Kokwon left the headquarters' air-conditioned lobby. She had no particular course of action in mind and stood there wondering what to do next. But soon, the asphalt underneath her feet started getting uncomfortably hot, and Kokwon, unable to stand it, walked toward the promenade at the back of the building in search of somewhere cool to think. She encountered a vending machine on the way and checked her funds. Having spent 460 yen for the train, she now had 190. If she bought a drink here, she would have only 40 yen left. But she wouldn't be able to return to Tokyo Station with only 190 yen anyhow. Deciding to soothe her dry throat for the time being, she bought a bottle of tea. She pressed the cold plastic to her cheek and sat in the shade. She had fully planned out what she wanted to say to Chairman Shijima, but she hadn't anticipated being turned away at the reception desk. Kokwon looked up at the headquarters. "My grandfather's in there. Maybe I'll get to see him if I just walk in, anyway." If worse came to worst, she could force her way past. Kokwon repositioned the bottle of tea to open it. An old man in a suit walked past her. And her eyes subconsciously followed him. The dots didn't connect immediately, but she realized after a moment that he might be the same person from the photo she'd seen on the bullet train, that man. Kokwon hurriedly chased after him. After Ishin had dismissed the president from his office, he had stared out his window until his secretary, one of the only people he trusted, had called out to him, "You seem awfully tired. May I suggest a walk in the garden?" It was an unusual suggestion, the garden. Now. A protest had crossed his mind, but the idea had appealed to Ishin's troubled soul. 20 minutes, just until my next appointment, he'd said, leaving the room. As he did, he had looked up at the motto affixed over the entrance of his office, "With spirit alone, we can soar." Seeing that the chairman had left the room, the secretary took out her phone. The skull icon was there, too. The garden behind Shijima headquarters was slightly elevated, offering a view of the sea. The Rainbow Bridge, too, was visible from the tip of the cape surrounded by green hedges. The water's surface glittered in the sun, and the ocean breeze blew pleasantly past the promontory. The man Kokwon was following stood at the overlook and gazed out at the far-off horizon. Gazing was perhaps not the right word, the man was glaring. His aura made that much clear, even from behind. A force poured from his being that discouraged other people from approaching. Everything Kokwon had prepared to say left her, and she ended up speaking to the man without a plan at all. She said in a voice so timid she could barely believe it was hers. Ishin turned slowly toward her. Irritation at the disturbance written on his face. "What?" he snapped, his brow furrowed. "Air. Would you like some tea?" Kokwon forced a smile and handed him the bottle. "I'm so glad I didn't open it." She would lose this fight if she allowed herself to be overwhelmed. Kokwon summoned her usual casual attitude and clenched her stomach. "I'm not gonna be weird." When a girl far younger than he struck up a conversation, Ishin was surprised, yet he felt his guard relaxing. Alone on such a fair day? He asked. "Yeah. I was going to meet with someone, but I couldn't." I was wondering what I should do. Here. Kokwon gave up the idea that he might recognize her and decided not to reveal her identity to the stubborn Ishin until later. She figured she would have an easier time acting normal that way, too. Kokwon indicated the bench behind her with a glance. Ishin sat down, and Kokwon set her things on the ground and took a seat next to him about a person's width away. So, were you planning to keep wasting your time doing that? Asked Ishin, looking out at the sea. Nothing about his behavior suggested he had any intention of having a proper conversation with Kokwon. I'd advise you to choose your next course of action soon. Life may seem long, but it's actually quite brief. Ishin glanced at her, then closed his mouth as if to end the conversation. Oh really? Life is short, huh? Kokwon replied, undeterred. She wouldn't get a second chance if this conversation were to end, sadly. Ishin seemed ready to stand up at any moment, but Kokwon held him back with another question. When did you start thinking that? Her question struck a chord with Ishin. Most people these days talked only about themselves, even at work, and ignored not only what others said, but also their questions. Yet this girl was boldly asking about the thoughts of an older man. He looked directly at Kokwon for the first time. She had an aura of wonder and pureness that made Ishin reluctant to label her a mere delinquent. And a familiar plushie protruded from the burlap sack in her lap. For me, life still feels so long, you know. As the inquisitive girl leaned forward, Ishin found it oddly difficult to meet her eyes, and he looked away. Recalling why he had told this stranger that life is short, he replied. I wonder. It might have been when my rebellious daughter passed on to heaven at such a young age. Ishin wondered whether Ikumi had thought her life long or short. As for himself, his life had ended when Ikumi was an infant who would not have survived but for his support. His time on this earth had meaning not when he was working or having fun, but when somebody had needed him. That had been the only thought in his mind back when he learned of Ikumi's death. Kokwon stared at Ishin's face as he gazed into the distance as though in remembrance of somebody. She was thinking of someone, herself. The ocean breeze blew through her hair, as if that very someone were urging her on. But what kind of person was she? How was this girl managing to strike right to the heart of the matter? The question was not unpleasant, and he bared his soul in response. She was a little older than you are. She would go on about being my successor, even as a woman, and she went to a school in America. She was an exceptional daughter. Reaching for the memories he had buried so deeply, Ishin began, reminiscing to nobody in particular. It was back when Ikumi was still an employee of Shirjima Motors. The committee had been dragging its feet with her pet project. In her straightforward style, Ikumi had been explaining her self-driving car concept to then-President Ishin and his yes men, or rather, the men who would plot to drive him from the company. But Ishin, younger than he was now, had cut her off before she could finish and rejected her idea. People can only appreciate cars through the act of driving them. Nobody will want a self-driving car. You may be right, Ikumi had said, standing up with the company's motto behind her, with spirit alone, we can soar. Maybe that's what cars used to be. But times are changing. It's a natural progression for software to take over driving, even the auto industry as a whole. She made her point level-headedly yet firmly. The day that hardware succumbs to software is the day the auto industry dies. He impatiently slammed his hands down on the table, and a silence fell over his men. Some of his men looked disapprovingly at Ikumi, and others made sounds of agreement with Ishin. Exchanging looks, they returned to whispering among themselves. Ikumi sighed deeply, not bothering to hide her disappointment. This company has no vision, no plan. Just memories of the distant past and a knack for tripping over its own feet. She gathered the papers in front of her, and walked to the exit, her heels clacking. She then looked back up at the company motto that had been at her back moments ago, with spirit alone. We can soar, a younger Ishin, a dreamer and an innovator, had surely believed those words at the company's inception. Oh, and, sir. If I were you, I'd change your motto. With a sunny smile, she left the meeting room. Ishin's desire to call after her was buried under his anger. He had been betrayed by his precious daughter, his most trusted employee. Back then, I believed she would one day understand how I felt and return to my side. But that day never came. The next letter from Ikumi's residence was to notify me of her death. Kokon's father had fallen for a woman just like him, somebody who told it like it was. She must have been such a cool person. Kokwon almost broke out in tears, thinking about her mother. But I can't cry now. He doesn't know who I am, he'll think I'm weird. Maybe if I tell him I'm his granddaughter now, he'll listen to what I have to say. While Kokwon was debating this internally, he suddenly spoke, but I must defeat that demon. Wah! With these two hands. Kokwon turned to Ishin and received quite a shock. The man sitting next to her was the king of Heartland. When did I fall asleep? Kokwon panicked. Now that Ishin had finished his story about Ikumi, she needed to tell him that she was his granddaughter and clear Momotaru's name, but she was now taking a nap, apparently. Though she wasn't aware of it, she was rather annoyed with her special power this time around. Before she knew it, her surroundings had turned into Heartland. She was still Kokwon, not Ancien, what'll I do? The king of Heartland slowly stood up and glared at the giant demon, rising from the sea. Without so much as a glance at Kokwon, he returned to the castle with the soldiers who had come to his aid. As Kokwon watched him blankly, joy crawled out of her sack. He's leaving. Is this a dream? Kokwon asked, still unable to process what was happening. Yeah, this is the dream world. Of course it is. But it doesn't feel like a dream. Kokwon was wondering what to make of this unusual sense when she heard a nasty voice behind her. You had me worried there. I thought you might tell him you were his granddaughter. Biwan appeared from behind a tree. Beardy. Why are you here? I have a private jet, Biwan boasted. It's not even your jet. It's the king's. Joy retorted with disgust. Humph. Biwan scoffed, confident that it would be his soon enough. Grandfather didn't know who I was. Why? Your father is unscrupulous. But at least he's honorable. He kept his promise to the king and didn't contact him at all. There's a line between honor and stupidity. Thanks to him, though, the king fully believed our lies. With a menacing smile, Biwan sneered down at Kokwon, as if to say that all honorable people were stupid. Soldiers encircled Kokwon, pointing their blades at her, and Kokwon realized why this dream felt different from the rest. Ancien would beat these soldiers if she fought them, but I can't. A fear welled up within her that she had never felt as Ancien, and Kokwon understood that though this was a dream, it wasn't actually. Her father's fairy tale about Ancien had already ended. Does that mean this is reality? Joy looked dubiously at Kokwon, who wasn't fighting. Biwan captured the pair without resistance. I'll be taking the magic tablet. Biwan wrested it from Kokwon's grip. Now Heartland is mine. Victorious, Biwan smirked. Kokwon glared at him in defiance. Meanwhile, the king of Heartland was watching the demon from above, as it climbed up into the Gulf area. The last engine had intercepted it in an effort to prevent it from reaching the factory, but it was no match for the demon's immense strength. The town was engulfed in explosions and black smoke. If only I had believed in the power of magic earlier. The king of Heartland's regrets echoed through his chamber, heard by none. In the reception area of the police station, Morio was waiting with a resistance member for Momotaru to be released. His companion was Tani, the fattest of the three men. According to him, Momotaru had been detained in this police station from the get-go because Watanabe had accused him of theft. So the resistance's leader, the head researcher at Shirjima Tech, nicknamed Old Man N, had notified the police that Watanabe's accusations were fraudulent before Morio and the others had gotten here. According to him, the charges against Momotaru would soon be cleared. Things went fairly smoothly, which might be because the police didn't trust Watanabe, Tani had said, then contacted his resistance fellows at headquarters and asked them whether Kokwon had arrived there. Morio was worried sick about her after she went to Shirjima headquarters alone and without much money. Kokwon was so clueless, sometimes, it was hard to think of her as a modern high schooler. She was fiery, but that also meant she might act recklessly. To top it off, the tablet she had believed was magic was just a regular piece of electronic equipment. The bespectacled man, named Iwazaki, lent Morio his phone so he could send numerous messages to Kokon's tablet, but she hadn't responded. Unbeknownst to him, Morio had started fidgeting with anxiety. Tani was speaking with the resistance at headquarters on his phone. And it didn't sound like things were going well. What? Okay, got it. We'll make preparations on our end, too. Tani hung up, his expression grim. This is bad. It seems Kokwon met the chairman, but she wasn't able to tell him who she was. Huh? Why? Kokwon had been so determined to clear Momotaru's name, and Morio found it hard to believe she had failed, and even worse, Watanabe took her away afterward. What? Morio exclaimed. The elevator dinged. The pair looked over and saw that the two interrogating officers were leading the newly freed Momotaru to them, Uncle Momo. Momotaru had no idea why Morio was there nor why he looked so desperate. If it isn't Morio? Why are you here? He asked bluntly. Morio impatiently shouted, it doesn't matter. Kokon's in trouble. When he heard that his daughter was in danger, Momotaru's expression immediately darkened. Momotaru's former comrades brought him up to speed in the station wagon on their way to the Shirjima Motors headquarters. I see. They wanted to steal Ikumi's data because the demo vehicle for the Olympics isn't working properly. Iwazaki nodded from next to Momotaru. That's right. But that was Watanabe's plan, and the chairman doesn't know about it. Momotaru's expression didn't even twitch after hearing that. His past experiences had left him jaded. Still, that's got nothing to do with me. But the reply left no room for argument, but Iwazaki still protested. A gloom descended on the resistance's members. In the driver's seat, Tani gripped the steering wheel and looked over to Old Man and for support. The silent man finally spoke. You're a great man, and you've achieved great things without our help. Momotaru turned his attention from the window to the other man, Old Man, and continued, as if he had been waiting for the response. But, if you've been keeping the original code to yourself, how is that any different from what Watanabe's doing? Ikumi's magic spell wasn't written for any one person. Momotaru looked back out the window, swallowing his desire to argue against his former superior. He hadn't meant to hoard it by any means, but, upon reflection, maybe it was as Old Man N said. The resistance, meanwhile, interpreted Momotaru's body language to mean he had taken offense and was doubling down on his stance. Only Morio understood how Momotaru felt. He knew Momotaru hadn't been keeping the code to himself and had used it to help the people around him, no matter how much the town might ridicule him, but he couldn't find a way to verbalize the truth either. At the same time, a riderless motorcycle followed the station wagon, carrying Momotaru and the resistance along the crowded Bayshore route. That motorcycle was the S-193 Heart that Morio had sent back to Shimatsui from Osaka. Why Heart had taken that highway, nobody knew. After they were taken into the castle, Kokwon and Joy were forced into the elevator with Biwan and his soldiers. The elevator climbed up and up with no indication of where it might stop. So how are you going to take over Heartland? Kokwon asked Biwan, who grinned with confidence. Heartland's engine heads are now gone. That demon can only be defeated by an engine head powered by magic. Is that right? Kokwon didn't know the rest of this story, because it had never been told to her. And the events unfolding before her right now were happening in reality. Probably, The elevator reached its destination, and its doors slowly opened. Biwan ushered her off, and she found herself atop a scaffold overlooking several giant hangars, the engine head maintenance plant, but as Biwan had said, not a single one remained. What use is the magic spell if there are no more of them? Biwan laughed off Kokon's naive question and wordlessly walked on. A siren echoed throughout the hangar, and an engine head model that was completely new to the fairy tale appeared from deep within. This is my secret weapon that will make this nation mine, crowed Biwan, ecstatic. Despite its incredibly sleek design, the machine seemed vaguely malevolent to Kokon's eyes. It looks evil. Nonsense. Look at its lustrous tricolor body. We will launch once the king's engine heads are fully destroyed. Then I will shoulder the dejected nation's hopes and become the new king. Biwan proudly puffed out his chest. Joy leaped onto him in anger. You crook! You've been lying to the king this entire time. The stuffed animal pummeled Biwan's face with soft fists, but Biwan easily brushed it off and kicked it away. I'll do whatever it takes to get the throne. Kokwon cradled the defeated Joy and glared at Biwan. And you call yourself an adult? Humph. The criticism rolled off Biwan like water off a duck's back, and he laughed. I have no more use for you. I feared only Ancien, the magic user. You may go. Then give me back the tablet. Fine, why not? Biwan had already extracted the spell from the tablet and installed it into his engine head. He produced the device from his breast pocket, reached out past the handrail, and pretended to drop it. No. Biwan played with the tablet some more, enjoying Kokon's reactions. Only the lowest of the low gloated like this. Momotaru had taught Kokwon how to deal with such people when she was a child. The worst thing you could do was to indulge them. Biwan had believed she would beg him to return the tablet. But she, like her father, refused to show weakness and eyed him scornfully. Irritated, he unintentionally let go of the tablet. Ah! With Joy in her arms, Kokwon overcame her fear and vaulted over the handrail without hesitation. Biwan was shocked. Nobody would survive a drop from this dizzying height. Before he could stop himself, he was leaning over the handrail to search for Kokwon. I don't see her. Kokwon had landed on a ridge below. The tablet was in her hands. She had snagged it by the corner at the last possible moment. Biwan instinctively breathed a sigh of relief. Too close. Kokwon made sure the device was intact, then looked down from her landing spot and began to appreciate how high up she was. I wonder where I am in real life. She couldn't let Biwan get away with dropping her mother and father's precious tablet from this height. Kokwon stood up carefully on the 20-inch wide ridge. Still carrying Joy, she glared up at Biwan as he leaned over the handrail. I can't believe you. Who raised you, you jerk? Biwan was angry at himself for worrying about Kokwon. Ugh, obnoxious girl. I'll get you back somehow, he thought, but then the elevator's doors opened. What is this ruckus? Biwan, explain yourself. Demanded an imperious voice. The king of Heartland marched toward them, accompanied by 2 soldiers. Biwan was immediately flustered. Oh. Well, I was attempting to capture this suspicious intruder, and though Biwan was smiling in an attempt to smooth things over, the king of Heartland didn't spare him so much as a glance and instead looked up at the engine head in the hangar. What is this engine head? Yes, this one was made as a precautionary measure, lied Biwan, wringing his hands. He hoped his hollow explanation would satisfy the king, but the king betrayed Biwan's hopes and looked over the handrails. And are they these suspicious intruders you speak of? The king looked at Kokwon, who smiled awkwardly back at him, unsure of what to say. Joy, however, waved broadly at the king as if they were old friends. That plushie. Seeing Joy, the king finally recalled the answer to the question he had been struggling with. But he decided he wanted to hear what sort of excuse Biwan planned to make before he said anything. Glaring at Biwan, the king sternly ordered his soldiers, bring those two over here. As the soldiers dutifully attempted to climb over the railing, the entire building shook with a loud rumble. Ah! The soldiers had immediately grabbed onto the railing, but Kokwon was on a thin ledge without any supports to speak of. She ended up bumping her rear against the wall behind her and pushing herself off. What's happening to me in reality? Kokwon was falling from a height of about 500 feet, and, without Ancien's knack for making quick decisions, she could do little more than flail in midair. She managed to grab onto the railing of a hanging platform used for making repairs, and she dangled from it. Carrying the tablet, Joy climbed up onto the platform and held a hand out to Kokwon. Kokwon. The girl channeled her strength into her quivering arm, trying to pull herself up. The car carrying Momotaru, Morio, and the resistance members finally made it to Shirjima Motors headquarters. But when they got out, they found a large crowd in front of the entrance, so big that they couldn't get in. Among them were television reporters, camera operators, and other people from the mainstream media. The clearly distressed security guards were struggling to keep them at bay. What was happening? Momotaru grabbed a man at the back of the crowd. Hey, what's all this about? The man turned around, his expression serious. Well, I don't really understand it myself, but apparently, a girl is in huge trouble on the 30th floor, he explained at length. A girl. Momotaru and Morio shared a glance. You think? Kokwon? They looked up at the building, but they could see nothing of what might be happening inside. Momotaru barged through the crowd in front of him, toward the lobby. Hey, let us through. Morio chased after him, not wanting to be left behind. Let us through. The resistance members weren't far behind. Following their lead, the media and onlookers started pushing forward. Get out of here, you can wait. Shouted Momotaru, forcing his way through the entrance. Uncle Momo. As Morio was swept toward the back of the crowd, Momotaru grabbed his hand and yanked the doors open. What the hell is this? Momotaru exclaimed. Momotaru had barged through the mob and entered the lobby of the Shirjima headquarters, or so he had thought. But the space where the lobby should have been was a dimly lit hangar of some kind, at least 650 feet high. A giant mechanical scaffold stretched nearly to the ceiling. Startled, Momotaru looked back at the entrance he had just come through, but the lobby's glass front had been replaced by giant metal doors, nearly as high as the room itself, and a giant black demon was trying to tear them open. For a moment, Momotaru was speechless. He looked down and saw that his own dress shirt and slacks had been replaced by a pair of parachute pants and a sleeveless track jacket with a skull on the back. Panicked, he whirled toward Morio, who was still wearing the same t-shirt and pants as before. What's going on? Momotaru asked. Morio had noticed the changes, too. Is Kokwon asleep again? Morio was convinced this was the same phenomenon that had occurred the last time Kokwon went to sleep, and he explained the previous night's events to Momotaru. So this is how Kokwon imagined Peach. Momotaru gave himself another once-over, for little people rushed to join them. When he took a closer look, he realized they were identical to the resistance members. To be fair, the little people in the fairy tale were based off these guys. Said Momotaru. The four looked uncertainly up at Momotaru. Behind them, the giant demon was still shaking the front gate, attempting to pry it open. The building shook incessantly under its strength. Momotaru looked up at the scaffold as though he had suddenly remembered something. He saw Kokwon above, clinging to a suspended platform for her life. Kokwon. But with her attention focused entirely on gripping the platform, she couldn't hear Momotaru's voice. Uncle Momo, at this rate. I know. We'll need to get creative to save her. Momotaru was already running through the rules of the fairy tale world. He had created it. After all, let's activate the engine head, Morio. Give me that. Momotaru grabbed Morio's bag and slung it over his own shoulder. The AR goggles were inside. With those, they should be able to operate the engine head. The little people of the resistance broke out in smiles at Momotaru's exclamation. Finally, Peach, no, Momotaru, would use the original code. Don't get me wrong. I just want to save Kokwon. He said to hide his embarrassment, then started racing up the scaffold toward Biwan's engine head. Kokwon felt her grip loosening on the railing as the platform shook incessantly. Joy struggled, too, trying to pull her up, but the plushie's arms were not very strong. Save that girl. In response to their liege's order, the soldiers securely tied a length of rope to the railing of the scaffold and started rappelling down toward her. My schemes will be discovered if they save that girl, Biwan thought. He needed to pull the King of Heartland away. The demon is right there. You needn't concern yourself with such plebeians. Please, my lord, you must escape. The king glared at Biwan and his false smile. And he issued an order to his soldiers, arrest that man. Stunned, Biwan found himself surrounded. In a pained voice, he began, my lord, you idiot. Do you think you can continue fooling me? His expression, severe, the King of Heartland looked past the railing, where Joy was still, desperately holding on to Kokwon. I bought that plushie for Ikumi. Ikumi had always taken good care of it, ever since she was a child. And, the girl who had it now. Only one possibility came to the king's mind. The girl had to be Ikumi's child. How many lies have you told me over these years? Realizing that his liege would no longer believe his lies, Biwan grinned widely and allowed his disdain to reveal itself. Your Majesty, your plans have failed. Now, let's not have any trouble, and hand me the crown. But Biwan's ruse crumbled before the king's overwhelming grandeur. I'll listen to what you have to say if we manage to save the kingdom from the demon. Take him away. But at that moment, a crash resounded through Heartland Castle's hangar as the demon smashed through the gates. Momotaru ran up the seemingly eternal spiral staircase as if his life depended on it. His heart was close to bursting by the time he made it to the top of the 30-story staircase. But there was no time to take a breather. He leaned out over the railing to look for Kokwon. She was still hanging from the same spot on the platform. Atta girl. I'll be right there. Momotaru turned toward the engine head. There were about 22 yards between the scaffold and its entrance. Not a distance you could normally jump. Was there anything he could use to get there? Momotaru scanned the area and saw, at the edge of the scaffolding, a half-extended crane for hauling up building materials. Momotaru vaulted over the handrail without hesitation and sprinted along the top of the crane as fast as he could go. But there were 11 yards between the end of the crane and the engine head. With spirit alone, we can soar, shouted Momotaru. Then he leaped off the end of the crane. The wall of air impeded his flight, and everything went into slow motion. Almost. Momotaru pointed his toes and reached as far as he could toward the ladder on the outside of the engine head. The tips of his boots made contact, but his outstretched right hand missed by a hair. Unable to support his weight, his toes slipped off the ladder, and Momotaru plunged toward the ground, but he couldn't afford to fall here. Momotaru desperately extended his arm and caught the ladder's bottom rung in his right hand. He immediately grabbed on with his left, too, then started racing up the ladder. Kokwon couldn't hold on anymore. Her right hand began slipping off the platform. Joy was holding her left, but didn't have the strength to pull her up. The King of Heartland could do nothing but watch the two from the scaffolding above, and he was becoming increasingly frustrated. The demon, having destroyed the gate, was proceeding deeper into the castle. Lava spilled from the cracks in its surface, which appeared and sealed themselves at random, and a blood-curdling howl sounded from its mouth. The soldiers, motionless with fear, had been unable to get any closer to the platform. Time was running out. I won't die here, thought Kokwon, but her grip had finally reached its breaking point, and she fell through the air with a scream. She saw Joy jump from the platform with the tablet. No, Joy, don't. Suddenly, Kokwon was awash in a feeling she had felt only once before, at Washuzan Highland Amusement Park when she was a child. The sensation of floating, like the one she had on attractions that simulated flying. is this how dying feels? But when Kokwon opened her eyes, she and Joy were being lifted up in an engine head's right hand. Whoa! Kokwon cheered, looking up at the machine that had looked so evil to her earlier. However, they weren't out of the woods yet. The demon had noticed the engine head and was now reaching for it with its enormous arm. The creature's body was made out of a lava-like substance, and they would be incinerated if it caught them, but the engine head grabbed the demon's arm with its left hand and, shielding Kokwon in its other hand, delivered a lunge kick to the demon. The demon's enormous body was launched away and out of the castle, skidding across the ground with a rumble. This was the power of an engine head fueled by magic. Its fluidity and strength were a cut above those before it. After being literally kicked out of the castle, the monster rolled along them. Engine head use road that stretched from the castle to the gulf area, kicking up a cloud of dust along the way. The people of the town, who were on their way to work, got out of their cars to see what the source of the thunderous sounds and tremors was. Hot in pursuit, the engine head calmly showed itself. It stopped once in front of Heartland Castle and, kneeling down, dropped Kokwon off there, from the palm of its hand. The palm alone was 13 feet thick. Kokwon realized the engine head she had expected to be a villain had saved her and was now gently lowering her to the ground. Is this engine head? Kokwon hopped off the giant machine's palm. It started off again. And she superimposed her father's image over its gallant figure. It looked about as tall as the Great Ceto Bridge. The engine head's cockpit was oddly designed. It consisted of a single pole standing in a bottomless pit, and atop it was a bicycle-shaped instrument that controlled the machine. Momotaru, the AR goggles on his face, was pedaling to control the machine all by himself. Kokwon, I'm sorry for putting you in danger. Though his words were not heard, her father was always thinking of his daughter, and she never took her eyes off him. Momotaru charged the engine head toward the shakily recovering demon like a sumo wrestler charging his adversary. Graha. Momotaru pedaled with all his might. The engine head's left arm lifted the demon by the hip, then threw it clumsily against the ground. Buildings crumbled in an explosion of dust. The engine head seemed to be winning handily, but Momotaru's stamina was nearly exhausted. The machine would ordinarily operate on magic, and so Momotaru's pedaling would be supplementary. But Biwan had not known that the magic program needed a password and a reboot. So, despite the spell, Momotaru had no choice but to operate the engine head manually. The password entry prompt still blinked on his head-mounted display. The system remained locked. Damn it, we need to access the magic. Who's piloting that? The King of Heartland asked as he watched the spectacle. But nobody there could answer him. Wow! Exclaimed Morio, who had joined Kokwon. Morio. Dad's on that, right? Yeah. Morio said with both pride and exhilaration. Uncle Momo's crazy strong. The engine head punched the demon once more. As the monster staggered, the soldiers in the hangar cheered. His thunder stolen, Biwan watched the fight without any enthusiasm at first, but then he noticed that the soldiers were distracted, and he gave a sinister smile. He shook his handcuffed arms and produced a magic phone from his sleeve. That's my engine head. This kingdom belongs to me. In his frustration, Biwan had finally decided to use forbidden magic. His face twitching, he tapped the screen with only his fingertips. The soldiers, noticing the unusual activity, turned around. Hey, you. Huh? He's using a curse. The demon screamed in agony but, once again, stood back up. Momotaru threw a full-bodied punch at it. The creature's upper body snapped backward under the blow, and it crumpled to its knees. Have I done it? Momotaru said, envisioning victory but heaving with effort. Kokwon, Morio, and the four little resistance members cheered from the castle, but the demon's death cries were only the beginning. Using Biwan's curse, the scattered fragments recombined themselves into the form of a bat, and just as Kokwon and the others noticed the dark cloud swirling around the bat, the mist immediately blanketed the area around the castle. Consumed by the cloud, the town began bursting into flames. And the smoke combined with the darkness, plunging the town into a deeper black. The engine head, too, was spontaneously combusting. What's happening? Heartland was engulfed in flames. Kokwon could do nothing but watch the enormous machine, without a clue what was happening. Burn, burn. Everything that doesn't go my way should burn. Biwan continued to curse Heartland, even after multiple soldiers struck the foam from his hands and wrestled him to the ground. Biwan's spell spread, becoming not only his hatred, but the animosity of others, consuming Heartland. Even the majestic king of Heartland could do nothing but glare at Biwan. Kokwon had started running toward the burning, motionless engine head. Not that she could do anything without magic, but she couldn't sit still and watch Momotaru fight by himself. Morio and the little people felt the same, chasing after Kokwon, but a swarm of black bats appeared to block their way and attacked them. Go! Wah! Desperately swatting at the horde, none of them could make any progress. The thing that was once a demon had shaped itself into something vaguely resembling a swarm of bats. One portion of the swarm reformed itself into a giant tentacle and shot into the air, then changed into lava and covered the engine head. Dad! Kokwon dashed through the burning town toward the mechanical giant, Kokwon. Morio, ignoring the bats, chased after her. Ha 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 ha. Losing his grip on his sanity, Biwan cackled maniacally at the sight of the burning town. His kowtowing, empty words, and expensive planning, throughout all those years had been for a singular purpose, to seize the throne. But that was now over and done. Biwan lost his mind and howled, "Let it all burn." He hollered. The cry reached the cursed swarm of bats, which flew over to Biwan, and engulfed him in fire. This message is from Shirjima headquarters IP. Some employee named Watanabe wrote it. LOL, for fame. An internal struggle. A marketing tactic. Biwan's magic phone displayed a stream of new curses, and it, too, was swallowed by the flames. The soldiers who had been Biwan's captors could do nothing but watch the rapid turn of events. Biwan let out a deathly scream. He became part of the swarm of bats and flew away, leaving behind only his crazed laughter. The king observed the whole scene with an expression full of pity. He then started toward the engine head's pilot, the only person who was still fighting to protect the nation. The king contemplated while he walked. I cornered Biwan, so I must be the one to deal with the consequences of his actions. The newly revived demon transformed into something resembling candy, and wrapped itself around the engine head, which was now immobile after its systems had gone up in flames. The machine lost its footing and started to fall. Momotaru, still in the cockpit, was nearly thrown from his saddle by the shock. He barely managed to hold on to the grip and avoided falling, but before he knew it, the bats had infiltrated the cockpit and were attacking him. The password entry prompt was still blinking on Momotaru's AR display. So we really can't beat that thing without magic. Momotaru searched his pockets for his phone. Kokwon. The magic spell. The spell would activate if the password were typed into the tablet. Just as he took his phone out to tell Kokwon this crucial fact, the engine head tilted even farther. Gah. The phone slipped from Momotaru's palm and dropped down the pit, out of sight. He had no way of telling Kokwon what to do. Momotaru took the AR goggles off, gritted his teeth, and began pedaling once more, but his stamina was nearly gone. "Da!" shouted Kokwon, standing at the tip of a shattered section of highway the demon had destroyed on its rampage, but the engine head continued to burn. With no signs of moving, the town around them had become a pile of rubble, burning in a cloud of black smoke. It was an overwhelmingly depressing sight. What can I do? In her panic, Kokwon was beginning to lose sight of her objective. Kokwon yelled joy, breaking its silence. Still clutching Kokwon's shoulder, it pointed at the tablet in Kokwon's hand. We can power the engine head using magic, Kokwon. Oh, right. She realized she could write the rest of the fairy tale, herself. She lifted the tablet over her head with both arms and typed the spell, with spirit alone, we can soar. Engine head, fulfill mom and dad's dreams and save Heartland. Kokwon declared. Then stretched her pointer finger toward the screen. Enter. A colorless light suddenly shone within the cockpit where Momotaru was feebly pedaling. Momotaru knew what it was, the light of magic. Soon, it had enveloped the entire engine head. The machine regained its strength and tore the lava around it apart. The light shone from its every inch, racing through Heartland, extinguishing every flame, and blowing away all the smoke. Even the cloud of dust, suspended over Heartland was erased, and the sky was restored to its blue glory. After the brilliant light scattered the bats, they regrouped at one point. They meant to torch Heartland and the engine head one last time before they lost their strength. Momotaru gave the magic-powered machine its last order, and trusting it, with his final wish, fly, engine head. The machine sprouted wings, and the booster rockets in its legs ignited, its booming footsteps and the sound of its liftoff resounded through Heartland Castle, and the engine head rose slowly into the blue sky. The swarm of bats ascended after it. Kokwon and Morio shielded themselves from the blast of the rocket engines. The few flames still burning throughout the town were blown out. Woa! The engine head accelerated its ascent, and the black swarm of bats followed it. Kokwon watched over her mother and father's dream from the ground, dust swirling around her. Guh. Momotaru, alone, endured G-forces he had never before encountered. The engine head rocketed straight into the sky, through the clouds, through the stratosphere, and right as it was about to enter low Earth orbit, it was mobbed by the swarm of bats. But that had been Momotaru's aim. I wonder if the king will acknowledge Ikumi's magic now. Momotaru prayed in the zero-gravity cockpit that Ikumi's labor would put out Heartland's flames once and for all. Eventually, the engine head's shining blue wings dissolved, and the machine floated along in orbit in a ball of pitch blackness. Kokwon and Morio saw a singular black speck in the blue sky where the engine head had flown. Something's wrong. Morio's eyes widened in realization. Maybe Uncle Momo can't come back on his own. Oh no. What do we do? We need to save Dad. But all they had was the tablet, and now that they'd used Ikumi's magic, there was nothing left in it. Their palms broke out in anxious sweat. Then they heard a familiar engine sound from behind them. Huh.